I'm joined by more fantastic tech leaders, and we're looking at inspiring positive change, how technology is improving society. We're joined by Christina Scott of OVO, Freddie Quek of Times Higher Education, Jared McGovern of the Tony Blair Institute for Change, and Sahil Kajini of Rabobank. So a great distinction and differentiation of different sectors, different geographies and regions too, and hopefully different perspectives. So my first question, perhaps an obvious one, but a good starting point, and Christina, I'll come to you first, given you are to my left. When we think about the potential that tech has at contributing to society, to what extent do you think it is already?
So I think most people in the room are going to think that technology has been positive in society. So you look in all sectors, whether it's education, healthcare, you can see how tech has really pushed forward and helped. So a small example is I went to a Spanish night class about 20 years ago. I used to go do an hour night class and I learned no Spanish. I did it for ages, I learned no Spanish. I've been doing Duolingo for about 2 months and I've learned so much, it's incredible. And so you can really see how technology can be positive, but then the flip side of that is pretty much everywhere you look at the positive, there is a negative. And so whether it's social media and the issues that people have with trolling and young people have with inappropriate content, whether it's in education and the divide between the people who have got and the people who haven't, and the educational divide, you can see that there's the flip side. And so definitely yes, but there is that, sadly, the negative as well.
Yeah, a yes, but. Freddie, yes, but. Would you expand upon that?
I would start by making sure that we understand the positives, right? And then because we've been challenged to be provocative to each other. So let me start by saying, if you look at at least 3 dimensions to how technology has been really pervasive and hopefully we can consider to be positive. One is at work. Can you imagine a situation where there's no tech or little tech at work? I don't think you can. I can, because I remember entering the workforce and there's no technology, there's no computers, there's no internet. So I totally can see how it has completely transformed organizations where everybody at work now uses some form of technology. So that's work. If you look at life essentials, we are also using a lot of things that we take for granted. Well, without technology, can you imagine those things that we take for granted today cannot happen? Parking your car, right? Paying bills, right? You may argue that those 2 things are must-haves, right? So technology is no longer a nice to have, right? It is an essential, right? Based on right. But then there's also a third category, which is entertainment, right? We all now use technology for entertainment. Anybody would disagree that technology is not great for helping to bring entertainment more closer to what you need and when you need them. So I'm starting there and then we'll come back later.
Okay, noted. Jared.
So undoubtedly, I think technology is good, can be good, but can also be bad. I remember, I'm probably slightly younger than Freddie, sorry. I first went online in 1993 and still remember the name of the first person I spoke to, which was, I was a teenager at the time, so it was okay, she was also a teenager. A girl called Lara Berenji, who now runs a vegan cafe in Washington, DC. And I remember it thinking, this is amazing, I can communicate with anyone in the world. And that's what technology has enabled, that all of you here and anyone around the world can communicate with anyone. The flip side of that is anyone around the world can communicate with anyone. So yes, the tools themselves are great. The tools aren't inherently bad. It's how they're used and how they're applied. So yes, technology undoubtedly has utterly changed everything we do. We just need to be cautious sometimes on the unintended consequences of enabling such tools to be out in the world.
Yes, understood. And Sahil, round us off the first question.
Well, I have to say, can we even imagine our lives without technology? Can you even imagine how we could have survived the Corona period without technology? right? So the technology is there to stay, and it's going to stay. But I agree with Gerard, with the use of technology and being interconnected, there comes the risks and also the downsides. Because then you will have too much of anything. My grandma used to say, too much of anything is bad, right? So too much of a technology can create depression, anxiety, but also crimes are being enabled, right? So misinformation, propagandas that are going through the connected world that we are in. So technology is a great thing, but you have to, treat it responsibility.
Okay, so we've established in the first question that there is a yes but to can tech impact positive change. So let's apply that yes but then to your own organizations, because obviously on a practical level as tech leaders, that is your job. So anyone can take this next question, but when we think about yes but, then what does that mean for you as tech leaders on a day-to-day basis?
So I think, so OVO is an energy retailer and we have around 4 million customers. And we obviously serve customers, some who are not digital at all and not on any digital means, up to the truly digital. And I think there's always a temptation, mainly because it is cheaper, to serve people in a single way. And I find it really irritating when I see things about CTOs saying, "Oh, it's amazing, we've moved everything to digital." And you get people like my mum. So my mum is never going to see this because she's not ever going to be anywhere where anything is ever streamed.
You can post it to her.
Post it to her. But actually she is totally left behind by all these companies that have gone truly digital. And so I think that what we're trying to do as a company is really look at the end-to-end customer experience. And some of that is very analog. And sometimes people do need to speak to people, but actually looking at how you can help people and how you can help them in the fastest possible way for their use case and for who they are, and not assume that everybody is this person and we're all online, we've all got a smartphone, because it truly isn't like that.
And not be a slave then to efficiency, because one of the major reasons, I suppose, for treating customers in one blank canvas or digitizing everything, it's for the speed at which you can improve the business or your function or whatever it is. So not being a slave to efficiency, then would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So it's much easier, but it's not the right thing to do. So to go back to our point on technology, good or bad, yes, there's fantastic use cases, but you always have to think about the opposition and the opposite and what's happening. And so I think that, my husband's been in science for all his career, and he's spent over a decade testing drugs. We do not do that with technology. We basically build something, we throw it out and we see, well, does it work? And it might work for some people, but actually we don't really test the use cases for the people who it doesn't work for. And I think that's our responsibility as technologists, is to really think about everybody in society and trying to build technology that works for all.
Yeah, responsibility, it's a good word to actually pick up on. Do any of the three of you want to pick up on responsibility? Where do you see the tech lead responsible, Sahil?
Yeah, I mean, but I want to go beyond technology, right? Because you can use the technology, but if you are there for well-being of your customers, right? You need to use the technology in such a way that you understand the situation of your customer. As a bank, we have tremendous data on our customers, but how much of that data you use actually in a responsible manner to serve your customer. And sometimes if you know enough about the financial situation of your customer, and you know for the stability, for the sake of a stability, you shouldn't sell some financial products to that customer, you should be able to say no. Although it's not good for your profitability, but you have the responsibility to say no. And that's being responsible and being a responsible bank.
It is difficult though to say no to that profit margin.
But you should.
You should, okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say Christina's point about access to technology, that it's not just whether someone is older than us, it's also that there is a real issue, and I'm sure Freddie will talk about it a lot, about digital poverty, that there are some people who simply cannot afford to have access to that technology. And by starting with your customer and working out what is it they need to do. Technology can enable some amazing things, but it's about how do people interact with that technology. Now, they may interact with in an analog way, but the systems behind are making it so it's as frictionless as possible. But you're completely correct. 100% digital is not where we want to go. In the same way talking about going into an office and having no computers, we don't want 100% analog either. It has to be focused in what is best for your customer, whoever you're supporting, and then using the appropriate technology or not to make that happen.
Yes, it's improving society in the context of which that society exists, in short. Okay.
If I may just add 2 points to it. One is, if you know, I think we all know about the 80-20 rule, right? And I think that is both a good thing and a bad thing, because for a long time, if it's good enough for 80% of the time, it's good enough for anybody. But if you look at today's context, that is no longer the right thing to do. So I want to draw that out as a point. The other point to mention is that I think it's important that we need to have a definition that we can sort of challenge and be objective about the conversations we're having. So for example, what is the definition of an IT leader? There are many definitions, but I may offer you one because in my spare time, as you know, some of you know, I'm doing a piece of research and I came across one of these definitions. And talking about technology leader who knows enough about tech to help their business, that is the given, right? To be business savvy, I think we're hearing a lot about that, right? But then do we hear part of the definition of an IT leader is to be ethical, which is part of the conversation we're going to have today. So think about that part of it. What does it mean? And also, there's another thing that also has been there a long time. It's only now that it's coming to our consciousness, which is, and also being a socially conscious leader. So if you take that in combination, I think it will help us with our conversation today, either agree or disagree, because it's one definition to be objective about.
Fantastic. And there is actually a main reason why all four of you on stage, obviously given you're great tech leaders, but each of you have an interesting story to share in regards to tech improving society. I wouldn't mind going through each of that in a short time. Before we do, to that point then on ethics, being an ethical person is core to being a leader. How then is ethics embedded into the tech function and then the wider business at your organization? So when you are doing your initiatives, looking to improve your customers, maybe your clients, wider communities, what does that look like and how do you affect that positive change?
I'm happy to start since I helped to create this question. If you look at the definition of tech ethics, right, one way to look at it as the practical concerns around the use of technology. And I think we don't have to go much further than thinking about one of the very hot topic of today, which is linking it to sustainability. Isn't that all our responsibility? So one of the things that at least my organization we're trying to do, again, is such a big problem that it's not for everybody to do, right? Is that we all hear about the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, right? And climate change is only one thing that we hear about. There's another 16 of them. How many of those do we relate to? How many of those are we doing something about? So it's very hard. And therefore, for example, in my organization, one of the things that we do is that I work for Times Education. We are in the education sector. We do the university rankings, but that's not the only thing that we do. So during COVID, we launched a product called SDG Impact Rankings. And that is a way to help organizations, higher education institutions, and now we're beginning to work with governments about how they can measure themselves against not one, not two, but 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So on one hand, we have a problem, but on the other hand, I think we all have a responsibility to help our organizations to think about how we can solve this problem.
Fantastic. How would you, Sahil, from your banking perspective, what do the ethical considerations, presumably a little bit different, look like for you?
Maybe I can follow up on sustainability. So sustainability, as a company, we are trying to reduce our carbon footprint, of course. But that's not enough, because then we have the customers and we are actually bankers for farmers. If you didn't know, we are the number one bank for farmers globally. It means that we need to help our farmers to change their systems as well. Not only based on our own systems, but helping them based on our own experience to change their systems in such a way, in such a manner that they change their portfolio of systems to reduce their carbon footprint as well. So it's going beyond your own company to help your customers to do that. So, and not only individually, because although for one customer it could be certain way, the right way, it could not be for the whole communities. You have to look at the communities beyond that. And through that, those communities, you can impact the society. For one example I can give you, so in Netherlands we have a kind of a problem with farmers with, who are having a large number of cows, for example, and the government is trying to reduce that because that business is generating a lot of carbon and CO2, but it's not good for their business, right? So you have to downsize the companies in such a way that it's also profitable for the companies, but they have to downsize in such a way that you know, you can meet government's targets. So there are smarter ways and smarter systems to realize for them that can reduce the carbon footprints of our customers, which impacts their community, but also impacts the society. So as a bank, you have to go beyond your responsibility of your own company, but going through certain manners to impact the society.
Excellent. Okay, let's look at then your each individual context with technology then. Christina, OVO has been one of the central players. We've had an energy crisis, we've got a cost of living crisis, we have numerous other mini crises underplaying all of this just to make it more fun. What has OVO been doing and looking at tech specifically to help your customers?
Yeah, I think I've only been at OVO about 20 months, and it's been quite a ride. We've lurched from one crisis to another. And I think the immediate crisis that we had to deal with is the cost of living crisis. And so looking at huge swathes of the UK population were just in fuel poverty, and the price was going up and up. And so at OVO, what we did is really focus on that in the first instance, putting aside some of our longer term ambitions, which I'll come on to. And so we looked at our customer base. We looked at the people who are marked vulnerable, and you can be marked vulnerable for a number of reasons. So you might be vulnerable because you have a healthcare machine, and obviously if you have your electricity switched off, then that's not good. Or you might be vulnerable because you can't pay. You might be vulnerable because you're aged, living by yourself. So there's lots of different reasons for being vulnerable. So recognizing the customers known to us as vulnerable and making sure that we are protecting them as much as possible, and using our data to then look at predicting the customers who are just on the cusp, who aren't marked as vulnerable but could fall into vulnerability, and making sure that we're reaching out to them. So using data science to make sure that they are able to get through to people, so jumping queues in terms of getting through to agents, making sure that there's no disconnections, making sure that if they don't have credit on their meters, that we give them credit. And so as a company, we, to sacrifice some of the revenue and profit during that period, put it towards vulnerable customers, both directly but also in a customer care package that we launched around anything from free boiler checks, electric blankets, lots of different things, and also working with debt charities to make sure that people are getting the support they need. So there's a whole plethora of things, but actually technology at the core to help service all of that. And then we're a little bit more focused now on our longer term goal, which is to decarbonise UK homes. And so that is our customers' path to zero. So that's everything from helping customers to have their homes insulated, making sure that they understand what grants are available, and looking at financing, working with council houses to retrofit. We are now installing EV chargers. We do a really fantastic EV tariff, which is fantastic. So it charges your car overnight at a really reasonable tariff when you're not using your car. And then it's greener and a lot more cost effective. We have launched solar, so we're now implementing solar panels. And so technology is driving all of that. but also providing the insight to customers and the information to customers, because it's really complex.
And I think you mentioned quite a few things that over, many, many months. Did OVO have the digital capabilities already in place to support those initiatives, to support, kind of switching quite quickly and pivoting, or have you had to, in parallel to that, build up strategies, people?
So OVO was a really quite small company, and it bought SSE, which was a much larger retailer, and came with mainframes and lots of legacy tech. So actually what we've been doing is we've been migrating from old tech and building out the new tech really quickly to try and move forward. But a lot of the tech is being built new. So there was some there, but actually we're building it out as we go.
Excellent. And what have been the major take-home points, though, in this whole experience? You've been there 20 months. You're seeing presumably positive impacts from your initiatives, but from the tech perspective, what have you learned as the CPTO?
I think the hardest thing is when you're in the industry and you're talking all the time about EVs and solar and export tariffs and import tariffs. Actually, it's nonsense to most people. Most people just want their energy to be provided as in the most cost-efficient way and green way as possible. And they want us to take the pain away from them and optimize it for them. And so we have to stop trying to push it onto customers to make the right choices and say, actually, we will partner with you and help you make the right choices. Because it's not the most interesting thing. It's entertainment's interesting. Energy companies are not interesting, but actually that's where the technology really needs to drive forward. We need to be able to use data to optimize and build the ecosystem to do that for business.
Yeah, and it must be amazing for the teams, from a morale perspective, to see the positive impacts that the tech is improving on their customers.
Yeah, and I would say that most people work at OVO because they really believe in that purpose and that mission, and so it's very core.
Fantastic. Thanks, Christina. Sahil, I'm going to come to you next at Rabobank. When we look at how tech is improving your customers and the wider ecosystem, what can you share with the studio?
Yeah. So in Netherlands we are a retail bank, and globally we are bankers for farmers. But in retail banking, so you are looking at how you can increase not only your profitability but also the customer experience for your customers. So one thing you can do is to have that easiness through the digital channels, but also you should not forget those who are not able or not having access to your digital channels. So you have to have that offline capability, but you don't want to decrease the experience. What you need to do is that having that omni-channel capability. For example, if something is started through your digital channels, and you're stuck and you go to the branch, I'm not sure how many of you are still going to the branch, not many I hope, but then you want to continue with that process. You don't want to start over again. You don't want to do again, provide the copy of your passport and other documentation. So that capability is helping to increase the productivity, I think, throughout the society, that you spend less time with your banking stuff. But one more thing is also, how do you help the society by reducing frauds and to reduce, for example, money laundering. So I think in Netherlands we are not proud of it, but there is 1 billion euros a year goes through money laundering through Netherlands only. How do we stop that? How do we use the technology for your KYC purposes? But again, there is a downside, right? So because if you use the data, you get a lot of, based on the learnings, we get better at it, but based on the learnings, we get lots of false positives. So you don't want to bother your customers with any, innocent transactions they do, but you want to be in control of it. So how far do you go with the using of technology? How much of common sense you can use? And on how much you can still trust the AI capabilities you have, right? So that's why we still have an army who are checking the false or positive cases to check whether the positives are positive. But more dangerously is false negatives you're missing through your technology. So we need to get better in those things to help the society further.
But presumably the last 5 years, it's improved tremendously, hasn't it?
Sorry?
It's improved tremendously over the last 5 years, hasn't it?
Whether it's improving through technology, it is, because we are getting better at what we do, but still there is a long way to go.
So what tech are you investing in then to support this? What are your priorities?
So we are investing in our data capabilities, for example. So and our AI capabilities, I have to say. We are not using ChatGPT. Don't worry about it. Our customer data will never go to such open platforms. But we are creating our own intelligent, detecting in our data, but there is also a regulation part of it. How much of data you can use in terms of data privacy. So it's a very delicate manner, and it costs us a lot of money every year. But we need to get better at it to help the society.
And what's the impact then for your customers, the people who need it most?
The impact on customers. So we are increasing our customer experience while we are keeping ourselves responsible. And that's the difficult balance you need to create. So you have to act responsible while you're easing your customer experience. One thing is, let me give you an example. We are working on the straightforward credit card generation, right? So we need to know your financial situation, your credit score, and everything around you to give you that instant credit card. But that comes through a lot of do's and don'ts with creating your profile and your credit situation.
Fantastic, thank you, Sahil. Jared, Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, even the name makes me think it's
the longest name organisation I've ever worked for.
Your role there doesn't just look at the tech function within the organisation itself, but as you say before, you advisory position for all the initiatives that happen all over the world. So can you just walk us through what that means?
So the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, again, huge organisation name, we exist to help governments deliver change. And that is primarily through technology. So whether it's improving healthcare, improving society as a whole, we put technology fundamentally at the heart of delivering that change. So recent examples, and I should say I played absolutely no part in this, given I've only been there 9 weeks. We have a program called e-Estonia. So we work with the Estonian government to deliver 100% of their government services online. But rather importantly, that doesn't mean we shifted everything to online. It just means every service is available online. It's also available through other channels as well. All centered around, very similar to the government ID that you have here for doing tax returns, except it extends further. So it integrates with healthcare, integrates with all your services. It's about using technology to really make it as seamless and as easy as possible for citizens to be able to do what they need to do. I think for anyone who's had to deal with HMRC, the NHS, etc., we don't have that seamless experience here. We're in a slightly different position that we have many different legacy systems. Estonia is obviously a much smaller country. And we have built up through dividing those systems and devolving a mass of data that I'm not sure will ever be fully sold to the United Kingdom, but thankfully Estonia was in a slightly different position, so we were able to really work with them to make that happen. And we're doing that same thing with other countries across the world, and it's a real example of using technology. Your example you gave about a credit card, no one thinks a credit card is a bad thing, no one thinks being able to transfer money is a bad thing, but it can be used, as you said, with the fraud, it can be used in a very bad way. We're actively trying to make sure that all the technology we use is used responsibly. We work with governments who are using technology for good.
And then when we think about countries elsewhere that perhaps haven't got the infrastructure that Estonia has, by sheer coincidence, I was there 3 weeks ago. My sister's moved to Tallinn. I've seen it firsthand. It's all very exciting. But for those countries that haven't got the infrastructure, what then does tech for good look like?
So in countries that don't have any infrastructure, that is, I'm sure from a technologist perspective, everyone here relishes having a completely green site. In some cases, having no infrastructure at all is very helpful. Certainly the biggest change that's happened, particularly in continents like Africa, is the prevalence of mobile. They have skipped the idea of you have a landline, you have your internet line. They've gone straight to mobile. So suddenly we have millions and millions of people who have in their, they have the sum of human knowledge in their hand here. Although as I say that, I think it's more, they have the sum of human information in their hand. The knowledge bit is applied by the humans reading it and digesting. So in some cases, that lack of infrastructure has meant they can leapfrog years of legacy. I'm sure we can all think back to when you had to pick a certain web browser to browse a particular site, or you'd see best viewed in Netscape Navigator at the bottom, which I appreciate. I'm going way back saying that. But we've skipped over that. They don't have Flash. Thank God they don't have Flash. We all have nightmares about that. So that lack of infrastructure, obviously, it has held them back in many ways. But now, thanks to the prevalence of technology, the fact that it is so much more accessible, they can make that leapfrog to have, in some cases, better healthcare records, better government systems than we have here.
And do you partner with other private companies looking to provide better impact, or is it specifically non-profits and governments?
We partner with various people. We definitely can't do everything ourselves, nor would we want to. So we are about connecting governments with the right people to deliver the right amount of technology change, which is, it's very exciting, it's very daunting, because there's some really big, meaty challenges, but it's definitely very rewarding as well.
Now, granted, I know you've been in the role for 90 days. This might be an unfair question, but I have to ask. Given your almost bird's eye view of the initiatives that you're utilising tech to improve different parts of society, are there commonalities of good practices that members of the audience can take back to their own organisations, or just to use to inspire them in some way?
I think the overriding thing I see, and coming back to Freddie's point about what is an ethical technology leader, I think it's about doing, and this isn't my quote at all, it's doing the right thing when no one's watching. So if we leap back to when GDPR was introduced, which I'm sure will introduce some groans in the audience, GDPR basically made you do the right thing. And we all knew, or most of us knew, some of the things that were being done with data was not correct. And it took GDPR to stamp a very firm foot to say, this is unacceptable, privacy is very important to people, and you need to treat data with respect. The challenge for technology leaders going forward, and anyone who is advising on introducing new technology systems, is to be ahead of that curve. It takes laws a long time to catch up with technology. And I think the role of a tech leader is to make sure that just because you can do something with technology doesn't always mean it's the right thing to do. So it's looking ahead to go, we want to be ahead of that curve so that when the next GDPR comes along, we're not scrabbling to make sure all our databases, everyone has consent, because it's already there.
So improving society is also about not doing something.
In a lot of cases, it's just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something.
Thank you, Jared. Now, Freddie, I've left you till last because yours is a bit of a different perspective. It's not necessarily the organisation you're in, it's what you're personally doing. Christina mentioned earlier in the conversation around individuals that might be left behind or are being left behind. Actually, my grandparents are the exact same. They are checked out of society. But you've been working quite hard the last few years on something close to your heart. Why don't you share that with the audience?
Thank you. First of all, let me challenge. My company's domain name is timeshighereducation.com. I think it's longer than his.
It is. You win. Sorry, Freddie, you do win that one.
Okay, in this day and age, we are known as THE these days too.
So competitive.
Yeah. Now, so if I can start from the education sector, I hope I think there's some IT leaders in the education sector in here too today. If you look at the organization that we are in, that I'm in, it has great responsibilities to be the voice of this sector. That's what my company stands for. It's been around for 50 years, publishing, still do, news and sort of commentaries across the sector globally about education, right? And I want to give one example. So the last few years, we've been running something called Digital Universities Week. This is where we're bringing the entire sector together. We have one in the UK, one in the US, one in Asia. And I was blown away by the most recent one in Leeds. And why I was blown away was because the sector came together to talk about one topic, digital. And everybody started talking about all the challenges, what we need to do, blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, on the last day and the closing session, we had a call to action. And the call to action was to create a digital inclusion strategy for the sector by the sector. Now, why is this important? So this is now coming to the beginning. So when I first got to know about this issue of school children in this country, and many of us, I think I've spoken to many of you in this room too, we were wondering during COVID, what can we do to help school children not being able to get online? It's such an obvious thing that we can do. I've got 2 children, and they struggle. But what was really interesting was that it was so difficult and somebody started a device donation campaign. We raised peanuts to solve that problem. And it got me sort of asking the question, and speaking to a few of you here, we started saying, why is this a problem? Why can't we solve this problem? And then this is where the more I found, the more I realized that this is a much bigger problem than what we thought it was, which was that if we think that the Department of Education has provided 1.3 million laptops, and the reason why we know the number 1.3 is because Marcus Rashford started the Free School Meals campaign, right? But if you really try to understand what is the real gap, people don't really know the real answer about how many school children are disadvantaged that they do not have access to digital devices. So if you extrapolate across from a sector that I know to now outside the workspace that we're in, and look at our communities, look at our parents, look at our friends, don't you think that we're seeing a lot of those kind of challenges where even my dad, who's in Singapore, he doesn't want to use a device, he doesn't know how to use one. Don't you think that is a problem? Just when we talk about tech being a great enabler, that we can do everything, but now I think it's beginning to dawn on all of us that actually there is quite a big percentage of people that are being left behind for a number of reasons. It's not about the have and the have-nots, not about whether you have a device or not. It's not about just the can or cannot, because there's some people who can and some people who can't. So people think that there is a skills thing. But there's also this dimension of the wills and the will-nots. Some people will do it because if you give them the opportunity, they will, but there will be others, maybe like some of our parents who say, why do I need it? Right? So it's a much bigger challenge. And together across the sector. So previously I talked about the education sector coming together to try and be more strategic and holistic in solving this problem. I'm really delighted to see the tech sector doing the same thing, because many of us are saying, this is a huge problem. We all know that, right? We can see that. But how can we solve this problem? It cannot be left to the government or a rich individual or a rich tech company to solve that problem. We all have a role to play. And this is where it's coming back to the point that we started at the beginning. Whose responsibility is it? Right? At one level is corporate. All our companies that move forward, they have a role to play there. But I think at the end of the day, back to the definition of an IT leader, we as an individual leader, we have that personal social responsibility to make IT good for society.
One thing that's really interesting, Freddie, is given everything I've seen personally of your initiative on the digital exclusion and inclusion, is your ability to galvanize people together, given how busy everyone is, particular leaders. What's your understanding, or what have you learned about the nature of collaboration then, given, therefore, its importance, as you say, in bringing people together and not just having individuals cry out into the void? What have you learned about collaboration?
I must make it clear that this is not me and not down to me, right? I think if you look at our tech industry and profession, I'm so pleased to be part of it. Why? Because if you look at the amount of innovation that we've been churning out left to right, we've been great at doing that, isn't it? And so for example, if you look at the internet, Is the internet regulated? Yes, self-regulation, not government regulation. If you look at this concept of doing R&D today, it's no longer closed innovation, it's open innovation. Everybody is a frenemy. Where did it all come from? Open source, where did it all come from? The tech industry has been creating both the problem but also the solutions. For example, this great collaboration at all levels. We're all here to learn and share with each other. So I think we need to play to that strength in all of us. And what I'm trying to do, I'll tell you this, is very daunting because at the beginning I was thinking, who am I? How can I possibly solve this huge problem on my own? And then very quickly I realized that actually it's not me on my own, it's about joining the dots. And the point of joining the dots is that every one of us here today, by default, just so you know, you're all implicated, right? We're all part of this thing because we're all part of the sector. We all have a role. Just imagine if we all take that personal responsibility to first understand this topic, and if we think that there is something that matters to us, and we want to do something, then all I'm saying is that this is where if we can sort of, just like the way we create this tech ecosystem, we come together also to think and also act together jointly on solving this huge problem.
I think that's a nice moment to pause and think of any questions from the audience whilst we're at the 4/5 of the way through. One question. Thank you, Nick. There's something coming your way, don't you worry.
Thanks, Peter. Peter, I'm not sure, knowing you for a couple of years, whether you're a big fan or not of Elon Musk. But does the panel agree that the best thing we could do for society would be to stop the development of AI?
Ooh. Over to you.
I'll take that one. No is the short answer. I think once a technology exists, I think regulation has shown time and again on various different issues that once something is there, when you try and regulate it, you can't. You can't stop an idea. You can't stop something that exists as a concept. It's a bit like once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. So I think we need to be careful with it. I would say AI, where it is at the moment, is very much based on learning off existing data sets. We're not at the stage where robots are going to kill us all. So I think the idea of stopping people thinking and people doing doesn't sound like something that we as technologists and people involved in technology would ever want to do and have done over the past, certainly the time I've been in industry, over the last 30 years. Because, to your point on open source, that happened because people were freely able to do things. So I think the idea of trying to stop people thinking and doing doesn't sound like a very good idea to me.
So on that, Sahil, go on ahead.
Yeah, I want to add to that. It's the idea of AI and that robots all will kill us all is not the only threat, right? AI can be used by also criminals and bad governments, right? So if you stop developing your AI for good, they won't stop, right? Those guys won't not stop. So you need to be prepared for that. So you need to be prepared like we are preparing for any cyber attack. You should be preparing for that. So you cannot stop.
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing on the AI bit, because I think, Nick, you're right to bring it up. I read somewhere that it's not that we don't know the right answers to AI, it's that we don't know the right questions. So when we think about the right questions we should be asking ourselves to understand the good, bad, neutral implications of something like AI, or as it is at the moment, large language models, where would we start? What questions should we start with? And actually it sort of falls into the question I was going to ask soon, which was sort of key steps, I should say, in initiating positive change. But where do you all start in the questions you ask yourself about how do we use this? Is this going to be good? And if it's not, how can we streamline it to something not as bad?
I think it goes back to, did you say just because you can do something doesn't mean you should? And so I think that there's so much capability that we build, and we might build it with a certain purpose, and we think about that purpose, and we're very tunnel visioned on that purpose. And actually we don't take the time to sit back and think, actually, how might it be used? Let's discover how it might be used, let's think. And I think that with your question to AI, it shouldn't be stopped, but I think that there should be more responsibility built in to the technologists who are producing it, so that they are able to have that feedback loop and actually take responsibility and try and make things better, as opposed to just saying, okay, well, it's not my responsibility, I built the tech. And I think that's where pure technologists, it's not just about the tech, it's about the impact you have. And I think that's, as technologists, that's our responsibility.
So if I may add to that too, back to that question at the beginning, just so you know, I think again, a number of us here are BCS members. The BCS actually responded to this, to the press, to the government, saying we should not pause doing AI, right, machine learning, because so that's one point. The other point is that again, I was able to listen to the chief AI architect of Intel, and what they did was, Intel obviously is investing a lot of money into this, but what they said too was that they also have a responsibility to provide the tools to check what they're doing. And I think that is part of the responsibility that organizations I see are beginning to take responsibility for. And again, back to the definition that I said earlier on about the 4 dimensions of an IT leader, right, or IT professional. If you talk about being tech, guess what? That's what we do. We will always come up with new ideas to make it better. But if you add in business savvy, this is why we say yes, but we may be skewed too much by saying because it's for profit, you just do what you need for profit. It doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, but for profit. But then if you add in the ethical dimension, guess what? We have a conscience, it's our responsibility, and if we bring that to the agenda to have conversations with our peers and in terms of those decision making, I think that helps, right? Because you're now having a voice to make sure that you have that conversation. And then you add in that 4th dimension about being socially conscious. I think suddenly now we have a way of challenging ourselves and others about thinking a bit more than just creating tech, just because we think that it's a good thing to do.
Could we ask the questioner what they think, whether AI should be paused or not?
Nick, you're up.
Definitely should not be paused. It clearly has to be used within some sort of boundaries. But if you, to your point about the questions, if the leading questions are how can we improve sustainability, how are we going to deal with CO2, how do you deal with health issues, etc., then that's probably the right way to get the conversation going, I guess. But definitely pausing is a mistake.
Does anyone disagree with that perspective? Are we all in agreement? Don't be shy. Wow.
Well, I can comment on that. So it's how do you define those boundaries is very, very important. If you say, if I want to reduce the carbon footprint and AI needs to come with the idea to do that, they will kill off all human beings, right? So you need to be very careful. How do you define those boundaries and what makes sense? And those things that make sense for you as a human might not be the same as AI interpretation of it.
Fantastic. And do any of you have any final closing thoughts based on the conversation we've had? It's been fascinating to understand more about what you individually do. I don't think we hear much of that enough, but from a general perspective, closing thoughts for the audience to take back with them.
I think I'd say in terms of, so all these things are quite challenging because we're trying to deliver ethics, sustainability and everything else alongside the actual just delivering bit. And so I think the more that you can build it into the core, build it into the language, build it into what you measure,
Make it a reflex.
the easier it is. So we presented recently to our board and our founder said, I don't care how much money it's making, how much carbon are you saving? And actually he probably does care about the money, but that's really important to have that as a metric because that's what drives the behaviour.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic.
Well, I want to phrase a quote from Spider-Man, with great powers comes great responsibilities, right? So with technology, we have a lot of power to do good things, but also we have the responsibility to care for our customer, society, and beyond.
Well said, Spider-Man. Thank you very much for your thoughts today. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all those watching virtually too.